Shoup's purpose in this paper is to lay out the 10-year battle between Can and the Church of Scientology, and he purports to be an expert on this subject. But let's look at the next section, his sources for information. There are two general categories of materials upon which assertions in this chapter rely. One is the author's over 35 years collecting and reviewing ACM records and published literature, along with interviews and correspondence with select ACM activists/leaders. Included also would be approximately 400 boxes of Can files, assigned as assets to a Chicago, Illinois bankruptcy court trustee, including court transcripts, correspondence, and so forth, concerning more than 50 lawsuits against Can, and 32 boxes just on receipts, audits, and other materials concerning Can's finances. These were eventually auctioned off by the trustee, and the purchaser graciously permitted repeated access to them for scholarly purposes. Do you know who the purchaser was? The Church of Scientology, who apparently was gracious enough to give Shoup access to all of Can's files after it became defunct so that he could write papers such as this. Shoup then says, in addition, this author served as a consultant/expert witness in several of the above-mentioned lawsuits for an attorney prosecuting clients' claims against Can, including the seminal Jason Scott plaintiff versus Rick Ross, aka Ricky Allen Ross, Mark Workman, Charles Simpson, Cult Awareness Network, a California nonprofit corporation, and John Doe 1 through John Doe 20 defendants, case number C94-00796, November 29, 1995, which spelled the economic and functional Waterloo for Can. So, do you know who the attorney was that was prosecuting that claim against Can for Jason Scott? Rick Moxon, attorney for the Church of Scientology. Yep, Shoup was the one and only expert witness called in by the Church of Scientology against Can. Is a picture starting to come into focus here? Now get this. The second category of materials is a cumulative published literature on the modern ACM, plus linkages to past counter movements in U.S. history, and international parallel groups, much of it authored by Anson Shoup and David G. Bromley. See particularly Shoup and Bromley 79, 80, 82, 85, 86, 93, 94, 95, Shoup, Bromley, and Oliver 84, Shoup, Hardin, and Bromley 84, Shoup, Spielman, and Stiegel 77, Bromley and Shoup 79, 82, 87. So, Shoup's next biggest source for anything he has to say in this paper is himself. In fact, he then goes on to invalidate anyone else who had anything to say about the so-called anti-cult movement here. There have been relatively few other assessments of the ACM. For example, Gary, 99, Beckford, 85. Some bibliographic, Saliba, 90, others merely derivative, Shin, 87, or some even misleading to sympathetic of side issue considerations, Zablocki and Robbins, 2001. Almost all points of interest and the capstone of the Shoup-Bromley corpus of work is subsumed by Shoup and Darnell, 2006, from which legal information in the second half of this chapter is almost exclusively derived. So, apparently in Shoup's eyes, he and the Church of Scientology are the only ones who can provide any real perspective or truth on the subject of new religious movements and groups who work against them. I hope that I'm making it clear that this person is no academic at all. He is a hired gun, sponsored and paid for by the Church of Scientology. Yet look at his language. Look at how he writes. He never says that he was hired by the Church of Scientology. He doesn't even admit a direct connection to Scientology. He even refers to himself in the third person. His partner, David Bromley, was the only other person I've encountered in this book who does the exact same thing. It's weird, and it comes off as too distant, as though Shoup is trying to hide something using language so objective he can't even refer to himself in the first person. Well, the fact is that he is hiding something. He's hiding his own bias and lack of objectivity on this entire matter. This whole chapter is completely worthless as an objective academic piece about the differences between the Cult Awareness Network and the Church of Scientology. I mean, seriously, this paper is about as useful as David Miscavige talking about the relative merits of psychology, or Tom Cruise telling me whether or not psychotropic medications are useful. Now, let me be clear. Just to provide a counterpoint, I am biased. I have made it clear from day one that I am not objective when it comes to the subject of Scientology. I was part of that group for most of my life and suffered a great deal of abuse at its hands. I also did things as a Scientologist and Sea Org member that were not helpful or beneficial to anyone, and I've come to regret much of my involvement in that group. I've been upfront from the very beginning of this video series that my bias is right out in the open. I do not like Scientology, and I have made my case as to why in many different ways. I think I've made a good case, but I know that I'm not objective, and I could very well be missing in some ways because of that. Shoup has not admitted any such bias. Yet I've shown how, in just the first 2 pages of his essay, he's blatantly pro-Scientology and an avid defender of all destructive cults and new religious movements. But he's trying to hide that bias behind a facade of academic linguistics and scholarly objectivism. So here's the deal. I read this whole chapter, and it's a total farce. I could go through it point by point and refute some or all of his claims, but it would honestly be a total waste of time because Shoup omits half the story and curves the parts he does tell in favor to Scientology. The fact is, many of the lines that he uses about deprogrammers and the Cult Awareness Network were very familiar to me because I heard them almost verbatim years ago when I was a Scientologist. This man was so deep into the Scientology camp that he was the one writing copy for them, not the other way around. I therefore could care less what propaganda he wants to write about the history of the Cult Awareness Network's battle with Scientology. It's a one-sided account. And just to put the final nail in the coffin here, let's just skip to the end so you can see the self-congratulatory tone this goofball uses when he's talking about the end of the Cult Awareness Network. With CAN gone, neither the American Family Foundation nor any of the sporadic contenders to duplicate CAN could replace its vital ACM role as both a disseminator of alarmist anti-NRM propaganda to the media and a clearinghouse for coercive deprogramming referrals. No other ACM group could or did step up to assume CAN's mantle as a primary ACM spokesgroup. Indeed, by the dawn of the 21st century, both AFF and the entire NRM/ACM culture war, or cult scare, were moribund. Groups like the Unification Church, the Family, or the Hare Krishnas had weathered their own internal issues, their members had aged, many were now grandparents, and their organizations had matured in sociologically predictable ways. Most important, NRMs had lost or outgrown the cultural rough edges that had earned them so much acrimony and public distrust. Many had simply faded from public controversy. He's trying so hard to make it seem like there was never any problem at all, and any controversy about destructive cults came entirely from CAN and similar groups. It's really pathetic. And I guess when he says that these new religious movements lost their rough edges, he means criminal offenses like breaking into government offices, stalking, harassment, perjury, fraud, blackmail, and the like. Yeah, Scientology's definitely over all that now, isn't it? We don't see any evidence today of such activity still going on, right?